Hi class, today we're looking at Chapter 3, Lesson 5, Adding and Subtracting Like Fractions. We are going to learn how to add and subtract rational numbers with common denominators, and that's what we mean by a like fraction. When adding like fractions, to add fractions with like denominators, add the numerators and write the sum over that same denominator. So for example number 1, find the sum and write it in simplest form. That simply means to reduce the problem. So for question number 1, we have 4 plus 6, and that's going to be added together in the numerator because the denominator is the same, so we keep it. So 4 plus 6, we end up with the answer 10 over 15. But then I notice I can reduce the problem by dividing it by 5, top and bottom. I end up with the answer of 2 over 3, and that is my final answer, 2/3. Now for example number 2. For example 2, we have 7 over 12 plus 11 over 12. We add the 7 plus 11, and we keep the same denominator. So 7 plus 11, we end up with 18 over 12. Again, my problem can be reduced, so I'm going to divide it, top and bottom, by 6. 18 divided by 6 is 3, 12 divided by 6 is 2. So I end up with the answer of 3 over 2, or I can convert it to a mixed number, which would simply be 1 and 1/2. So either answer is correct, the 5 over 2, or the 1 and 1/2. Now let's take a look at subtracting fractions. To subtract a fraction with like denominators, subtract the numerators and write the difference over the denominator. So it's very similar to adding a fraction. So now we have 20 minus 2 over 21. So 20 take away 2, we end up with 18 over 21, and I notice that can be simplified by dividing by 3, top and bottom. And we end up with the answer of 6 over 7. And since that is the farthest we can simplify, 6/7 is our final answer. Now for example number 2, we have 11 over 12 minus 5 over 12. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to subtract the 11 minus 5, keep the denominator of 12. So 11 take away 5 is 6, and I have 6 over 12. I notice that 6/12 can be reduced by the number 6, so that ends up giving me the answer of 1 over 2, or 1/2. So 1/2 is our final result, and it's very similar to adding except that you are subtracting. Go ahead and take a few minutes to complete the guided practice here at the bottom. Please turn your notes over to the back side now. Now we're going into a section about adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So remember, when you are adding or subtracting mixed numbers, you can write them as improper fractions. So you would have to convert the mixed number before adding or subtracting. You can also add or subtract fraction part and then add or subtract the whole number part and then simplify your answer. So you can also add or subtract the whole numbers and then add or subtract the common denominator of each individual fraction. So for example number 1, we notice that both the denominators are the same. So since they're both the same, I'm going to just keep my answer that way. So in this case, I'm going to start with taking the 4 and I'm going to add it to the number 3 because both of the whole numbers have the same fraction part that has the same denominator. So it makes it easier for me to add just the whole numbers together. Now I'm going to add the two fractions. So the fractions are going to be the 4/5 plus 2/5. And that gives me the answer of 6/5, which now I realize 6 over 5 is an improper fraction. So I'm going to convert that to 1 1/5. And now I have to add that whole number to the number 7 because that's adding an extra whole number. So my final answer is going to be added 1 plus 7, and then I'm going to add the 1/5 at the very end. So my final answer is going to be 7 is going to be 8 1/5 because I had to add the two whole numbers together to get the answer 8. Now for example 2, I'm going to show you the other way of doing this problem where we would convert it to an improper fraction and we can still do the same method. So we have the same denominator, which that's fine. Now we have 20 times 4 plus 3. That would get me 83 over 4. Then I'm going to subtract it by 3 times 4 plus 1 is 13 over 4. And since I converted them to improper fractions, I simply can just subtract the two numbers. So 83 take away 13 would then give me 70 over 4. Now I can take that 70 over 4 and convert it to a mixed number, or I can also realize that the fraction could be reduced. I could actually divide it by 2, top and bottom, because they both end in even digits. So 70 divided by 2, I end up with 35 over 2. Now I can take the 35 over 2 and divide that and create the mixed number. So 35 over 2 turns into 17 1/2. So both answers are correct. If I wanted to leave 35 over 2 as my answer, or if I wanted to convert it back to a mixed number, 17 1/2. Both are acceptable. Now go ahead and take a few minutes to complete questions 1 through 4 on our practice. You have two choices. You may either add or subtract the whole numbers and then add or subtract the fractions, or you can change them to impropers and solve them that way as well. Now in this section we're looking at algebraic expressions. The algebraic expressions are simply expressions that we have to substitute the numbers in for the variables, and we would solve it either adding or subtracting these fractions. So for example number 1, I have x plus y. I notice that the x, according to the directions, x equals 5/8, and I'm going to add that to y, which is 1 3/8. So again, there are two ways I can do this problem. I could keep the whole number and just add the two fractions, or I can convert the whole number to an improper fraction and solve it that way. So now in this case, I'm simply just going to keep the whole number 1, and I'm going to add 5 plus 3, which gives me 8 over 8. And because it's 8 over 8, 8 over 8 actually equals 1, so in reality I'm just going 1 plus 1, because I have to add the original whole number along with the 8 over 8. So my final answer is the answer of 2. Now for example 2, I'm going to subtract y minus x. So now this time I have 1 3/8 minus 5/8. As you can tell with subtraction, you got to be very careful. So I noticed that it's 1 3/8, and if I would subtract the fraction, I would end up with 3 minus 5, which is a negative answer. So sometimes it's easier to convert the mixed number into an improper fraction. So 1 times 8 plus 3 is 11 over 8 minus 5 over 8. Now I can subtract the 11 minus 5, and 11 minus 5 is simply 6 over 8. And that can be reduced by dividing by 2, top and bottom, and I end up with 3 over 4. So 3/4 is my final answer. Now go ahead and take a couple minutes to answer questions 1 and 2. Be very careful when you are adding or subtracting, and you have two choices again. You can convert them into improper fractions and add or subtract that way, or you can simply add or subtract the whole number and then eventually the fraction parts. In this last section, you need to complete the guided practice on your own. Remember all the rules that you follow and pay attention to the signs and use your integer rules. Just remember, when adding or subtracting, you do have to pay attention to the negatives and the positives.